Hey everybody, hope you had a nice weekend and welcome to Monday. So I wanted to talk about a few things here today. I will go to my notes, here. Um, First thing you're going to be reading and doing work on this week, you're going to be looking at writing strategies and ethical considerations. And when we're talking about ethics, it's important to look at what role the IRB plays in doing ethical research and what exactly the IRB is. So, the IRB is the Institutional Review Board, which is every university has, and they are pretty much a group of faculty and other professionals around campus who have experience with research, who will review every research proposal. So, whenever you're going to do a research project using human subjects, you need to get IRB approval first. That's why you did your city training. You need to do city training, the CITI training first before you do an IRB. And within that IRB proposal, I uploaded a document to D2L that has a little outline about IRB and also a link in there to IUP's IRB page with a lot of helpful, handy information also about IRB stuff. You will talk all about your project. You will explain who your subjects are, how you're recruiting them, how you will keep confidentiality, how you will just everything about your project. And then they will go through it and say, is this appropriate? Are you allowed to do this? What changes do you need to make before this is considered ethically responsible? Right. So the key is when it comes to ethics in your research is for a lot of the research that I imagine anyone in this course is doing, there isn't a lot of huge problems. You get into a lot of issues, obviously, when you're dealing with medical research and things like that. But, doing a survey, asking people about their opinions on or their attitudes, and if it's not on, particularly private subject matters, it's not really normally a very big deal, right? There isn't a lot of potential harm. The IRB has to make sure that whatever potential outcome you get from your study far exceeds whatever risks you're putting your participants in, right? So you'll go through the IRB, you'll talk about your project, you'll talk about your subjects, you'll talk about how you're going to keep your data confidential. You're not allowed to share the data you collect with other people, right? That is exclusively to you. Also, it's a bit different in quantitative and qualitative research, but for example, in quantitative research, you have to keep your data de-identified. In other words, the researcher, if you're doing a survey, say, I can't know who the survey participants are. I can't be able to link the responses to a person. You have to keep that confidential. I can't know who's involved. And there's ways to do that, obviously, if you're using like an online survey tool like Qualtrics, which is we'll talk about when we talk about surveys, where it's just IP addresses and they can get converted. So you never know who you're talking about or who's answering your questions. It should always be blind, and you have to keep that data confidential. Now, with qualitative work, it's different because you are speaking about a particular person's experience, and you have to know who you're talking to and about, and who that person is colors their responses and affects the data, but that is a good thing for qualitative research because it provides the context that you're looking for. So it's a little different in those two regards. Included with IRB, you put in the application. It could be expedited or a full review, right? So some research needs what's called like a full review, which is a much larger, more intensive review. That's if you were doing your medical research, things like that. But anything you guys are going to be doing would be expedited. You should take a couple weeks to get it back and get approval for something like that. You would also include in your IRB application your recruitment letter. So whatever letter or however you're contacting potential people, whether it's an email, whatever, you would be sending that along, showing how you're recruiting people. A consent form, right? Everyone has to sign a consent form before they begin a study. So you have to get people to sign a consent form. You'd have to provide that to IRB. And then you would need a debriefing form. particularly if there's any kind of, quote, deceit that's in your research. So, for example, it could be, if you're doing an experiment, you never really tell people exactly what's going on, otherwise it would compromise the experiment. So afterwards, you need to let people know what was really going on and why you did what you did, and that's the debriefing. At that point, you have to give people the option of saying, you know what, I don't want my data used. For whatever reason, people, if they don't want, after finding out what the study's truly about, if they don't want their data used, you can't use it. So they have to sign off on it at the end. I've never had that happen, I can honestly say, but I'm sure it can. So something also to think about is this debriefing. Now, you may not think of it, but anytime there's what's called deceit, like I said, so something as simple as, for example, in my research, looking at political media, I've done experiments where I've provided newspaper articles or news articles for people to read and then answer questions about opinions, attitudes. And I've said simply changed the, so I give an article and I said it was from CNN, but really it was a Fox article. Or vice versa, give a Fox article but attribute it to CNN. Something that simple, I have to then tell people and say that there was deceit involved, even though obviously it's not a big deal, it didn't hurt anyone, but you have to let them know. I have an example. I once told people that you are going, after this survey you fill out, you're going to be having an online discussion with another person. And the reason was to make it seem like a realistic environment, so they answered questions in a particular way, whatever the case may be. There was no conversation that was going to happen afterwards. People didn't know this. They really thought they were going to have a conversation. So at the end of the study, I had to tell them, look, study's over now. You don't have to have a conversation. Even better for you. Your time is done. But I had to let them know. You have to provide whatever incentive, right? You have to let IRB know what incentive you're providing people, whether that's students and you're giving extra credit, or doing a lottery, having everyone enter into a lottery for a $25 gift card to Amazon, or whatever it is, whatever the incentive is. Now, the incentive, though, cannot be too extreme. If the incentive is considered too much for what you're asking people to do, it's considered coercion, and you can't coerce people to do it. Now, it may not. When does something become coercion? It is a different line. But think about a certain ethical situation. If you said, hey, if you were studying parents of children about something, and your subjects were parents, your participants were parents, and you said to these parents, look, as incentive, we have a professional photographer here at the study site. After you fill out our survey, do our study, we will get they will take a professional picture of you with your children, and in a normal situation, and provide that to you. For a normal parent, whatever, oh, that's nice. It's nice, a quick picture that you can have. Doesn't seem unreasonable. We're doing a little survey. Not a big deal. That'll probably be fine. But imagine you were dealing with a different population, like prisoners, and you were doing the same study, but with prison inmates and asking them questions about families, whatever. And then you said, I'm going to provide you a professional photograph of your child. For a prison inmate, that is a much bigger deal. That's not something that is readily accessible to them. They can't just see their child whenever they want. They can't get professional pictures. There's limits. So if that was given as the incentive, people, or these prison inmates, may be much more willing to do things they wouldn't normally want to, or say things they wouldn't want to, because it almost feels coercive because the incentive is so great. So for that population, that would not be considered okay. Just one small example that I can kind of think of off the top of my head of what I'm talking about here. So there's a lot of these little things that you got to think about when you're thinking about doing research and ethical research and all that stuff. So the ethics of research, again, it's really interesting. We don't run into too many problems in the social sciences these days, but back in the day, before there was IRB, before this, some studies got out of hand. The Stanford prison experiment. You have, of course, Milgram and those kinds of studies, which kind of crossed the line. And when kind of it was kind of found that, look, we can't have researchers self-policing themselves. There needs to be some outside sources looking at and making sure that everything is, on the up and up. So your question prompt this week for the discussion asks you to think about particular ethical scenarios and difficult situations you may encounter and how you would react or what's the appropriate reaction. But I'm going to leave everyone with a question to think about. So if you're thinking about medical research, you would think, look, we know that medical research, especially for new drugs, pharmaceuticals, it goes through years and years and years of extensive testing. First, you have to test, on animals, and first it's on mice and this and that, and it takes years and years, and you can't give it to someone because you don't know what's going to happen. So, what about experimental drugs that haven't been tested? And if you have someone who is very sick with a very, 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 a terminal illness, they only have weeks to live, and the doctor says, "Look, I'm developing this new drug. It hasn't been tested. It hasn't been tested on animals. It hasn't been tested anywhere, but we think it could work. Is it ethical to give someone that drug?" Now, again, like I said, they only have weeks to live. There's no other kind of cure. You've tried things. But this drug could have horrible adverse effects. We have no idea. Is it okay to give someone that drug? Something to think about.